guns when I was walking around, and if I happen to work with there were Marines around, man, there is a certain kind of salty you get to once you add that second rocker under your rank, and for sure a third rocker. When does that kick in, and why is it a universal thing where there's just a salt that hits a Marine once they get to a certain rank?
Part of it is kind of circumstantial. Part of it is, I think, honestly, living up to the people who went before you. So, people who join the Marines, there are certain kind of people. There's a pretty good argument out there that the Marine Corps is a cult. The people who are drawn to the Marine Corps, they really want something challenging. They want something tough. They want something elite. And so when there are young Marines and they're trying to prove themselves and kind of earn their place and things like that, they look up to some pretty colorful characters, some folks who stand out. They're really hard, but also they're pretty charismatic people in many ways. And so as you grow as a leader, you pick some attributes from the people that you've served with, but also you have to be yourself. So you can't, you can emulate other people, but you can't imitate them. And so you kind of grow as you learn about yourself and you learn about the organization and the culture. You just you grow into it. And sometimes you even act in certain ways that might not be your personality, but they're commensurate with the responsibility that you carry. Right. So I got to yell at these guys, even though I'm not a yeller, but right now that's what they need. And that's what I have to do. So you have to kind of rise to the occasion, I think, sometimes.
That's exactly the example I was going to use. Was I had a first sergeant who I didn't particularly care for, but he came in and he dressed down one of the guys. And then he told me later on, it's like, every now and then, I like to have a good time. But every now and then, everybody's got to know that I'm going to get crazy and I'm going to be pissed and I'm going to expect something. And then I'll apologize publicly and all that because I picked on this person. But I also know that they can take it. Yeah. And it was a leadership lesson that I don't know if it was meant to be for me in some kind of particular way, but it was definitely a leadership lesson I took. Sometimes you do have to perform the part of the person that you're playing. And I'm going to add to that because I met a colonel who taught me a lot about NTC. For everybody watching, NTC is the National Training Center. We go out, we do maneuvers, and tanks practice tanking, spies practice spying. We all practice things. And the colonel's like, I've been to NTC a lot of times, as you might imagine. A colonel might, every time you deploy, every time you do annual training, whatever it's going to be. And he said, my job is to play the colonel. So I know the guy with the bomb is going to come to the hospital at some point. I know that's going to happen. I have to let it happen, even to the detriment of my performance, because these guys need the training effect. I don't need it. And so I take the hit, because if I get too far ahead, then these guys don't have the surprise. And all of these things go into leadership in ways that we don't think about.
Yeah. It reminds me of a story kind of talking about folks who are leaders stepping into their positions. When I first pinned on that last rank Master Gunny, I checked into 2nd Battalion, 6 Marines, 2-6. Which to me was really special because that was my first unit in the Marine Corps. I went from PFC to sergeant there. So to come back as a Master Guns, I was pretty excited. And I've always had a real young looking face. I'm 48 now. And if I shave, I look like I'm 14. So my second day in this new unit, of course, I'm clean shaven. I'm still on active duty. And I got just PT gear on green. And I walk in there, and what I didn't know is 15 minutes before I got there, there was a working party, right? There were a bunch of privates, PFCs who were there. And the gunny, who was the officer of the day, he had just met them there, and he tasked them with, doing some working party. Well, I walk in 5 minutes later. I look very young. He's never seen me before, and I got PT gear on. And he looks at me and just assumes that I'm like one of these young guys. And he says, "Hey, you about to take your butt outside?" I said, I looked at him, and right away, I kind of knew what was going on. And a buddy of mine was the assistant ops chief, and he kind of looked nervous and stood up. He's like, "Oh man, this guy's talking Master Guns." But I really kind of played with it for a minute, and I just looked at him. I said, "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant." And he said, "Well, how about you get out there?" And then I said, "Yes, Gunnery Sergeant, I will." And then I just extended my hand. I said, "First, I want to introduce myself. My name is Master Guns Walker." And this dude, this big gunny, he goes, "Oh crap!" And he jumps down. He jumps down, starts doing push-ups. But I laugh and I said, "Hey, no, get up, Gunny." He tried to apologize. I said, "Hey, look, man, you don't have to apologize. I know good and well, if you knew who I was, you wouldn't have acted like that. I'm just glad that gunnies still run the Marine Corps. And when you walk in the room, you just believe you're in charge of the room." So it was a really good experience. And I was like, man, the Marine Corps is still in good hands.
Yeah. Again, all these leadership things that you're not going to read about in the book. You've got to see them perform. I had a sergeant major, and he was older. He was his last job, battalion sergeant major. And he found some reason to make me do push-ups. And, like, it was kind of jovial. Like, he's kind of like, oh, I got you and everything. And maybe he knows who I am, but he doesn't really know who I am, because there's just too many of us running around. But he's got an idea. I'm in pretty good shape and everything. And so I get down and I'm doing my push-ups, and I just go 0, 0. I do 100 push-ups, right? And I do about, I don't know, 50. He's like, dude, just get up, But there was a thing in there where I was like, oh, this is going to be fun because I'm just going to act like it doesn't even matter. Like, I do push-ups all day. And then he saw what I was doing, and then he realized that, like, I didn't need that much motivation. Like, I wasn't some guy that couldn't. And I'm an intel unit, intel battalion, right?
Yeah.
And so I can understand, like, wanting to figure out, like, what I could and couldn't do. He didn't know that I was fast and I was strong and all those things. But it was funny because it taught me a little something too. And I'm like, oh, you know what? Putting someone on their hands and their tiptoes, to make them do push-ups, it doesn't have to be a punishment. It can be a form of like an evaluation. It can be a way of saying, I see you, let me help. Because what's he going to talk to me about? He's like 50 or whatever old he was, and I'm in my mid-20s. And so it was just a cool lesson that I don't know if he meant to give it to me, but he gave me this lesson of like how I could treat people once I had some rank, once I had some authority.
Yeah. And I think something that a lot of folks overlook is there's a real exchange of energy and kind of motivation between young members and older members. So like when you're a brand new young guy and you see some old salty guy who's, been around the world and has been, had a lot of experience, you look at them and you're like, wow, you want to hear some of their stories and some of their experiences. But what the young guys don't know is the old guys, they remember with such fondness when they were young in uniform, and they love the energy, and they like to see like a young guy that's squared away and that's motivated, that wants to be there. So that interaction, there's really an exchange of kind of momentum and energy, and it's really it's a nice thing, and it that kind of thing coheses a unit together really well too.
Yeah, I hadn't thought about that, but you're right. I'm gonna go back to the thing about the Marines being like a religion or whatever it is, because I'm an Army guy, and my buddy Scott Husing, you may know Scott, you may not, but we would talk, and I'm like, you guys love being
Scott
in
Husing?
the Marines. Like, yeah, he's a very, very good friend of mine.
You said Scott Husing? Okay, I know him. Yeah, I know him well. He was my instructor.
Yeah.
I've got his book right here, Echo and Roddy. Yeah. And when I was a master sergeant, he was a major. He was my instructor at a school I went to.
Yeah, I've got his book somewhere. I bought it several different ways because I love that guy. But
he's awesome.
When you talk about leadership, there's ways to lead. There's different things that you can do, these lessons that you can pick up along the way. And it's funny when you look at the Marines being like a religion or a cult. I'm like, you guys love being in the Marines. Just love it. You have flags. You guys, if you see another Marine, you're like bound to say hi to them. And he always like, what's up, hard charger? And then the person's like, well, who are you?
Yeah, that's true.
And I'm like, Army guys, we don't care. Like, yeah, sure. Like when I worked in the 82nd, I worked in this thing. It was like a mix of civilians and then intel guys like me. And we were Department of Army civilians, right? So we weren't really in the Army. We were sworn in, but we were with the Army. And so some of these guys have no idea what it's like to be in the military. So I've got to show them. And there's kind of a rank thing, but not really. And I don't have any rank that's special. So I'm kind of trying to mentor these guys into what it's like to work for the 82nd, which, by the way, I don't know what it's like to work in the 82nd. I've never been an infantry guy in the 82nd, but I have an idea that we don't have any idea. And so I would say things to them like, do you ever see these guys like work 12 hours? Yeah, but we're working for the government. I'm like, you can't do that. And so I had to teach them, like, these guys work until the job's done. And if the job's done, they find more work to do and they keep working, and you guys are very similar. Like, it's just you guys. If you guys don't do the work, there is nobody else to rely on. And so the 82nd is like, there's no problem, but we can't outwork. And goddamn, do they have a legacy for being tough? They got this dude and he's wearing a poncho in the snow. And it's like, that's fine. I'm not going to be cold. I got killing to do kind of thing, these are the guys that went before. These are the World War II guys. And so when you see that and you understand what the standard is, and you get to say, this is how you do this. And when you don't do this, they wonder what's wrong with you, because people die when you don't do that. People freeze to death when you don't do that.
Yeah, I think organizational culture and unit culture is really important. That's something the Marine Corps does really well, although the Marine Corps has got its own problems. But no matter what type of military unit or even in the civilian world, organizational culture and unit culture is so extremely important. And that's what it's one of the elements that bonds people together, that along with enduring hardship together. But it brings out the best in people too, because they want to be there, they want to contribute. And combined with when you have an eye towards the history, lineage, and legacy of that kind of organization, it continued to perpetuate success.
Yeah. Yeah. You know, even though we don't have these legacy things as much in the Army, you do have that person on your shoulder. Like, oh, if someone so was like, so they had this rule when I was in Europe. And if you drove in a Humvee, you had to wear a helmet because they didn't want you to hurt your head. And you're just driving a car, you know, you're just on the streets in Germany, no big deal. And so we had a convertible. So everything's off the top. It's just us and a windscreen. And my boss, we were in uniform. And my boss is like, hey, hops in. And I'm like, hey, we got to wear helmets. And he's like, do we? I don't think we need to. We're going way out across town. And I'm like, it's the rules. Like, you know, I don't know. It's just simple. And he's like, you know what? You're right. You're right. So we put on helmets. And no shit, Sergeant Major saw us out. Nowhere near post. Wasn't looking for us. Happened to come across us. And instead of looking bad, we shined bright. He's like, you guys did not have to even do that. He's like, I'm so impressed. And it wasn't part of our unit culture, but it was part of like leadership culture. And it made us look to be, because we're pretty fucked up. We're an intel unit. You know, we got a bunch of people that, you know, are soft and don't want to do things. By the way, they have attached to us LURS guys. LURS guys, for everybody watching, are rangers who sit on the side of a mountain and they do like hard ass ranger things. And then they got all us, you know, pussy intel guys. And so we had this problem with our unit. Like we weren't resolute in the right kind of ways. We also had a strategic mission and a tactical mission. So a lot of us were wearing suits and walking, you know, because we're spies. And it made it really hard to put those things together. But when the Sergeant Major sees keys like us wearing our helmets way across town, it lets him know that like, hey, these guys are standard bearers. They're good dudes. And all of these things kind of stack in your favor. Because you are looking for hallmarks of great soldiers, great leaders, so you can mentor in the way that they need. How am I doing?
Yeah, that's true. And something that I think young service members, maybe they don't recognize or they take for granted, is if they will adhere to, if they'll have, you know, strict adherence to discipline and standards and the things they don't really care about and the things they don't think are important, they build their own credibility so that they will have the opportunity to do the things that they want to do, right? To get the good missions, to get the good the jobs, because the leaders above them will know that they can trust them in the little things. So it believes it's got this professionalization that they can trust them with the big things. And that's one thing the Marine Corps really is really big on is a strict adherence and disciplined standards. And I think that stuff's important, even though a lot of them are, you know, they can get pretty silly, some of the rules, but it builds habits of thought and habits of action, which is a good thing. Yeah.
It's funny because there's also like a healthy sense of rebellion, you know, and so you are trying to get away with things. Because they also want that. They don't want you to follow all the rules. You know, sometimes you got to break them. But it's funny. And again,
that's probably why most veterans have a beard.
And never wear reflective anything.
That's true.
Nope, not going to do it anymore. Yeah. When I was working a lot of the time, again, I'm Department of the Army. I'm a GS something, right? Whatever. And I knew how to do my job, but I didn't know 100% how to integrate with that unit that doesn't know me. So you can imagine, like, if an Army guy, CI, comes to Helmand Province and I'm in your unit, I've got some work to do before I get carte blanche to go out and do what I need to do to help you guys. You know, and even though it shouldn't be this way, I'm an Army guy. You guys are Marine guys. I've got to find a way in. And if I don't get to go on missions. And I shouldn't even ask because I haven't earned the right. I've got to earn every single thing with you guys before I get there. And so the staff is dangerous to me because if they don't like me, if they think I'm undermining what they're trying to do for the boss, they'll kill me and I'll be off the camp and going somewhere else, right? Like all these things can happen. And I'm talking about us. This is not them. This is us.
Yeah.
Well, here's what I figured out with Sergeant Majors because I didn't know how to win them on my side because I didn't help them very much. Well, you know, I can send them my reports, but what do they care about that? Like they're doing Sergeant Major stuff. And then I figured out I go on a lot of patrols, seen a lot of units come through. I've stayed in this one part of Baghdad for a long time. So I've seen units come over and I know what's dangerous and what's not. Like a back of this MRAP, I saw just one time, but these guys had a 50 cal barrel that wasn't secure. It was just loose. And look, it's not going to go anywhere 9,000 times out of 10,000. But boy, if anything gets moving to that thing, we get rocking and rolling, we fall down a ditch, that 50 cal barrel, that thing's going to kill someone, you know? And it's supposed to be tied up. There's a place to tie it up. It's just, they had to adhere to the standards. So I realized one day that I can talk to the sergeant major, and, put your sergeant major hat on, right? Like, if I came to you and I said, hey, listen, I go on a lot of patrols, I see your guys, and I can be a set of eyes for you when you're not around. I can see things that you're not allowed to see because I see these guys working day to day. And so if it's drinks that are unsecure in the back of an MRAP, or, rounds that are, let loose or whatever, if I see guys climbing on top of a LNTV, they don't have a helmet on, I want to let you know, you got to protect me. You can't say that I'm saying these things to you, but also I want to let you know when guys are doing the right things, so that you can, let them know, like, hey, you guys are doing the right thing. I know, I see, right? And that made me so bad. That sergeant major's like, I'll always protect you. You don't have to worry. I want to hear what you have to say, the good and the bad, because I care about these guys. And you really saw, like, it would almost tear up, like, I care about these guys. It's so dangerous out here, and I don't want them to hurt themselves. If we get into combat, I could accept that. But if they fall off, this part of an thing because they're not tied off, or if they hit their head and they get a concussion, I can't take it. And that, again, this all goes back to the leadership thing. That little bit to help that sergeant major better take care of his guys and gals, it made a difference, and it made me matter to those guys. And nobody ever fought harder once they saw me perform and do what I did for them. No one ever fought harder for me when there was. So I bring a lot of bad news, right? I'm bad news Turner. That's what I was. When I bring the bad news, sergeant majors, I was like, nope, Pete's all right. We're gonna keep him around. And so that unlocked that piece for me. But it took years to figure that out, Doug. In my mind, what does a sergeant major have to do when he's deployed, right? But once I figured out what they did and I knew how to help him, man, everything changed for me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, because every individual needs to have a purpose, right, and a sense of purpose, and relationships matter. So yeah, that's a really good observation and a way to become, in the unit, kind of meshed into the unit.
Yeah, and I guess all this is sort of like a primer on what we're going to talk about, because we're going to talk about the movie The Gift. I'll put the link right here, and it's debuted basically yesterday, and it's on Apple TV. You guys can see it right there. This is a motherfucker of a movie, you guys. It's giving me emotional feelings right now. It's the story of Jason Dunham and the unit he was in, and guess what? Adam was in that unit. And when you hear their company commander Trent, who's been on the show before, when he talks about him seeing Jason and the way he conducted himself, and just all the different things that come to David Kniess, who makes this movie with you guys, and he talks about the guys bringing Dunham food because he's working on their patrol. All the paperwork that this, there's so much pre-planning and all these things that you have to do, and you would love to go get a bite from the chow hall, but you have work to do, and it's more important that you get work done for all these guys to keep them safe, take all the heat off of them, than it is for you to go get a cheeseburger or whatever it is. And so they talk about all these elements, and I know the hallmarks of a good leader, and that's what I hear from what people look at Corporal Dunham and what they see from him while he's still alive.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. We've known Dave Kniess since 2004, and so he's really he's been a friend to the guys in Kilo. He's really done an exceptional job telling Jason's story, so in a way that honors the memory of Jason, that showcases the heroic and courageous actions he did, but also telling the story of his brothers, the guys who were in the squad and then the platoon with him. And you'll see many of those in the film, and also the family. And so by watching the film, we're keeping his legacy alive, but also you get a glimpse into the cost that comes with such an action. And so it's a really powerful film. Like I said, we've known Dave for over 20 years now. And, when I watch the film, I get emotional at certain key points because I knew, when these events occurred in 2004, I was a platoon sergeant. I was a staff sergeant. All the guys you're going to see in the film, though, they were like lance corporals and corporals. So they were really young. They were between the ages of 18 and 21. And so now you're seeing them interviewed, and they're middle-aged guys. And it's really fascinating because some of the experiences seem like they were yesterday, but they were over 20 years ago. So it's a really powerful film. One of the things I'll tell folks too, though, is even though it's going to tug at your heartstrings, I will say Dave did an exceptional job about ending it on a very kind of warm tone, where you get a real sense of love and a sense of brotherhood from the guys in Kilo, and which really to any Marine or any combat veteran will also resonate with that sense of family and belonging and brotherhood and really of love.
The Saving Private Ryan, it has that earn this. Tom Hanks's character says to what's his name's character? I can't think of his name right now. Super famous actor. I can't pull his name.
Matt Damon.
Matt Damon, right? And then you see that scene at the graveside, where he finds Tom Hanks's character's, thing, and he wants to know if he earned it, and that goes to the weight that I'm getting emotional now. That goes to the weight that all of us carry, whether it's through that vision and understanding what the standard is, or seeing someone who sets a high standard and then does this sacrifice to protect the people that he cared about, this family, this cult that he's in.
Yeah. And I was going to say, for a lot of the guys too, Marines, particularly grunts, when they go to combat and it's a kinetic fight like we had in 2004, every one of them examine in their own lives, like, hey, maybe I won't make it home. And so they even do these difficult things like writing the last letter home, put it in an envelope that says open in case of. So everyone prepares their own heart and mind to not come home. But what many of us didn't think about is what happens when we do come home, right? When something very surprising happens, that we live, but some of our brothers don't come home. And so, we deal with that and we navigate life, our thoughts and emotions since then. Yeah. But going into it, I think many of us didn't think about that part of it. And that is where you'll see people have the greatest struggles.
Let me add this in too, because again, like I'm often an advisor, right? Like, so I'm the spy who builds up his WASTA, his influence with the unit. And invariably, like the commander, they grow to love me and appreciate me because I'm helping them keep their guys alive. That's part of my mission, right? And when they start saying, hey, Pete, I need you to come to this, ceremony because we lost a soldier in my battalion. Well, I'm absolutely going to go. And I'm a person that they can confide in because I'm not part of the unit. I'm more, because there's a thing with it's for everybody else, this, but a battalion commander can't really have any friends. They're really kind of alone. If they spend too much time with one person, that scuttlebutt starts and everything. So they kind of have to isolate themselves in a lot of ways. But I can sit on the couch. I can go to meals with them because I'm just this advocate. I'm this counselor. I'm this, person who has intel. And the more I understand them, the better I can perform. So we spend a lot of time together. When you end up going to these ceremonies, which are heavy, I don't know if you guys did one, because sometimes you're just overwhelmed by your pace of combat. Like you're just out the next day. But for those who don't know, what you'll do is you'll take what's left of that service member. If the helmet's there, if the body armor's there, the boots, and that stuff goes like on this cross. And then they do a roll call and the dude's not there. And like, you hear my voice.
Yeah.
It is heavy. It is heavy. And these are babies. These are 18-year-old kids, like you were saying, 21 years old. And this person is gone. And they were there yesterday.
Yep.
Or they were there 2 days ago.
And when you do those things in combat, a lot of times within 24 hours, those same young Marines have to roll back out on patrol. And so they have to compartmentalize in such a way that they can perform their job and continue their mission. So they pack their emotions deep down. Yeah. And for many of them, it's years later before they can unpack them, examine those wounds, and deal with that. So it's pretty difficult. One of the things, for those of you who haven't watched The Gift yet, you'll get a glimpse of this. We did a reunion with a bunch of the guys from Kilo Company back up in Scio, New York, which is Corporal Dunham's hometown. And so we basically camped out on his family's property, and we conducted a unit hike up to the gravesite. And there we had a memorial service. And we really planned it right. We had some help from like the Marine Corps League and from the VFW. And so we had a color guard, we had a rifle detail, and then we had some bagpipes, right? And then we had a ship's bell there, right? So the Navy and the Marine Corps big team, and very touching too. One of our old corpsmen from Iraq had stayed in the Navy, and he became a command master chief, and he was there at the reunion. So when we did the roll call, and we had the drummer do the drum, and then we had the bugle and stuff. We had our command master chief, right, our old corpsman, ring the bell when the names of the fallen Marines were called, and so it was very powerful. And the Marines were all in formation, and as you go down the roll, you're calling the names of some of the Marines who are there, right? So you call their name and they're saying present, they call the next name present. and then you get the name of the fallen Marine, and then they say their name, and they say it in a particular way, so they repeat their name, and there's no answer, and it just hangs so heavy. And then when we do the ringing of the bell and the playing of the taps, it's very emotional, but in some ways it's also like it's a processing and it's a healing, and so it's a bonding agent once with another. And so
Yeah,
it's my belief that combat veterans who struggle the most are those young men who do 4 years and they get out and they go back to hometown USA because they're isolated from their brothers, they're isolated from a sense of community. Old lifers like me, I stayed in the Marine Corps, after our fighting in Iraq, and after I got wounded in 2004, I was still in for like almost 20 more years. And so I was always around Marines. I always had a mission. I always had, tempo to keep me going. And I was surrounded by a community of people who had similar experiences to me. So I think that helped me to move on and in a lot of ways. So when we had that reunion back with Corporal Jason Dunham's family and with some of the brothers from Kilo, it was a real healing time for us to spend time together. And so at that memorial service, as you said, our old Kilo 6, our old company commander, Trent Gibson, he spoke, and then I had a chance to speak to the Marines too. And one of the things I told the Marines that day is, well, let me tell you a funny part. I told them, I said, we were young grunts. We knew each other in war, and we knew each other so well that we could recognize each other by our silhouettes in the dark. And then I paused as I looked at these, middle-aged, some overweight men, and I said, some of your silhouettes have changed. And so, a little bit of humor helped, was a balm. But then I said, hey, listen, many of you have hitched to your own lives and unassumed guilt. I said, you feel guilty for being alive. But I reminded them, I said, all of those ones we lost, they wanted to join, they wanted to go to combat, and they would rather that it was them and not you. I said, they don't want you to feel guilty. They want you to have a good life. And so I told them with a measure of authority, I said, you're released from the guilt that's been holding you back. And I told them, I said, you're released. And, then we finished up, we went on back, and, now we had bonfire, and, guys were hanging out, having beer and talking. And many of them pulled me aside privately and told me that they needed to hear that. They needed someone to tell them that they're released from their guilt. And so I felt, in some ways, I felt like I was kind of back in uniform, back, as an old staff NCO, having a chance to lead again. And I will tell you that it was a very special time, and I was very humbled to be a part of that. And I love those guys, we joke in such ways. We say, if one of those guys called me, I would show up tomorrow with a shovel, no questions asked.
That's right. I got some tape. I got some bags. Yeah. There's a lot, and you likely have to relieve them again. Every time you guys get together, that's probably something that you need to do, because we tend to grab that shit back, and it's like the fattest you ever are is like how fat you end up getting to. Like, these things that are negative tend to draw you right back to where that spot is. And there's this deep wound. And, I always say that, because when you do a lot of things in combat, you just get damaged. And if we could see that damage, like on my arm, you would treat me completely differently. And I would treat myself differently. Yeah. But because I can't see it, I push on and I push through, and I lean on toughness, and all these things that are great some of the time. But sometimes you need to do things. Like, I've got a very dear friend who is a very good warrior. And with that comes a lot of damage. And every now and then we've got to do an exorcism. And I've got to get that evil out of him, and you know exactly what I'm talking about. And it might involve too much booze, and it might involve being reckless, but exorcisms aren't gentle. And if you don't do that, and it's a big thing. And again, I want to get back into your guys, but you can't wait till someone's at the end of the rope to tell them to reach out to you.
Yeah, that's right.
You've got to get them mid rope. You've got to get them off the fucking rope. You've got to constantly make an effort to fight for one another. And you can't save everybody. And that's, that's part of the deal.
Yeah. What I say is we have to wash out our cup. And what I mean by that is, a matter of fact, if you know Scott Huson's book, Echo and Amati, he referenced an article I wrote. The first piece I ever had published, it was called Post-Combat.
That's your thing?
Yeah, Post-Combat Residue. Matter of fact, there's a coffee cup right there. So that one that's right there on my shelf. And then this article that's right here. Oh, there you go. It's called Post-Combat Residue. It's the first piece I ever had published. And basically I make an analogy. It was published in the Marine Corps Gazette back in like 2013, I think. But I make this analogy to an old coffee cup that we poured strong black coffee in, that we never wash the cup out, but we just keep using it and keep using it. And after a while, there's a stain or a residue that gets in there. I go on to say, hey, listen, that cup isn't broken. That cup isn't unserviceable. Matter of fact, it was used for its primary purpose, but there is a stain in it. There's a cost that's associated with doing that. So then instead of post-traumatic stress, I'll say it's a post-combat residue. And so the residue, there will always be a little bit of a stain, but you can take time to wash it out. And if you take time to wash it out, then the stain will become less and less. But it doesn't mean that you're broken or damaged or anything like that. It's just evidence that you were used for your primary purpose.
Yeah. Yeah. And I know like a lot of folks like to say post-traumatic growth and, post-traumatic stress or whatever it is. But for me, it's a disorder, and I've constantly have to reorder my house, and so disorder is what it is for me. Maybe I'll get better one day, but maybe I won't. But I work on trying to keep myself balanced. I say no to more things. I've learned how to deal with it. Still, look, I still got bad thoughts all the time, but
sure,
that's how I deal with it, right? And so if for someone else it's going to be growth, and it's a temporary thing, for some of us it's going to be a disorder. That's fine. We've got to deal with these things, but that is all perilous work, and we lose people along the way because life is hard. On top of just in case anyone doesn't know,
Yeah, and you made a good point that we really have to pursue balance because the thoughts, the reactions aren't going to go away. But if we pursue balance, then we can manage them, then we can respond to them in ways that aren't destructive to our own selves, because there's a lot of self-sabotage that comes as we navigate, life afterwards. It's pretty common.
Talk to me about your relationship, in the platoon. Back then you're a platoon leader. So everybody watching platoon, depends on the unit and everything. But, it's let's say it's 4 squads and there's 7 dudes in each squad. We're just 30 guys, right? Maybe a little more, maybe a little less, maybe some guys get added on. But the basic thing is you're the dad, and you're out there and trying to make sure everybody's all right. And just so you guys can understand, and then I'm going to let Adam talk about this. You come across an infantry unit. These guys are all paratroopers. This is where I was at. And I see the E7 prepping these guys for their patrol. He's not going to go on patrol. That's not his job. His job is to be there on the camp, take care of things. He's more administrative at this point in his career. And he's putting his hands on his guys, on their belt. Like he's checking them before a jump, and he's checking everything out, and he's smiling. And you can see he loves these guys. He's going to make sure they're as ready as they can be to go out that gate that day. He didn't give 2 shits about me. I'm just going to sit in the back of a truck somewhere. But I watch him adore these guys and care for them and show them what it means to be a leader who's very hands-on. He's like, turn around, let me check everything out. I want to make sure everything's good. I don't want to miss a detail before you get out, because when you leave, I'm not in control anymore. So I got to make sure you're as squared away as you can be. And I talked to him about it, and he's very emotional about his guys. Like he had a real, oftentimes you hear like, I just want to take care of soldiers. And I'm like, that's what you say at a board. That's what you say to get promoted. But then you see guys who do it. And it's amazing. So when you're looking at your platoon and you're dealing with all this stuff, it is heavy fighting. It is dangerous. Guys are getting hurt, and getting hurt is, it can be anything. You can sprain an ankle, get back out there, whatever it is, right? You're dealing with a lot of damage before, Corporal Dunham jumps on that grenade. So talk a little bit about your relationship with your platoon. Talk about what it is like to be a leader who's trying to do their best to make sure that they're as prepared, as ready as they can be, doing all the right things so that, they got a shot.
Yeah, it is very much like a family. And so you're, in some ways, you're like mom and dad. And so I was a platoon sergeant in one platoon. So I was a staff sergeant. I was the platoon sergeant. I had a lieutenant. Corporal Dunham was in a different platoon. My buddy, John Ferguson, was his platoon sergeant. So, we had 4 platoons in the company. And so, I was a platoon sergeant in one platoon, and Dunham was a squad leader in a different platoon, but we were all in Kilo company. And so, many folks who know our story and they'll hear about the backstory. We talk about how we reorganized the company right before this deployment. This was our second deployment to Iraq. We had participated in what's called the March Up in 2003. We were only home 4 months, and then we went back for the second deployment. And during that time, our company commander saw that things were going to change a little bit in theater. We were going to be fighting a counterinsurgency, and we needed to take our weapons platoon, and we needed to kind of disperse and essentially have 4 rifle platoons, and then weapons specialists would be, in many ways, just become regular 0311 regular riflemen. And so we did this kind of draft. And me and my buddy John Ferguson, we came out of the field when our company commander told us we're doing this, and we did not like this, right? And Trent Gibson, old Gibby Kilo 6, he probably knows this. We did not like his plan, right? Because I had trained with my guys and deployed with him for a year, and I had my guys, right? I had some really great guys, had a couple of misfits, but I knew how to manage them, right? They were my problem children, so to speak. So I didn't want to lose any of my people. And so, Trent was a really phenomenal company commander, and he's a very strong leader. And he said, this is happening. So that night, John Ferguson and I, we went back and we just started like making our lists, right? Kind of racking and stacking our guys. He and I don't know if everybody knows this, but he and I kind of made a deal, right? We came to each other. We said, all right, look, man, here's my top guys. Do not put them on your list, right? And Ferg told the same thing to me. He goes, okay, these are my top guys. Do not put them on your list. So we wouldn't be pulling the same guys. But we also said, hey, listen, but you got these two guys who the Marine Corps uses this phrase, problem children, which kind of means a guy who gets in trouble a lot. He goes, hey, listen, you got to keep your problem children, but I'll keep my problem children because you already know their issues. You know how to deal with them. So we already had these kind of like, we agreed. Now there's two other platoons that are also in this draft. But we weren't confident that they were going to put the level of detail into analyzing and racking and stacking. So Ferg and I stayed up all night, just like making our lists. And then sure enough, we came back and he got the top guys he wanted for his squad leaders. One of his was CPL Jason Dunham. I got the three guys I wanted for my squad leaders. And so, and then, as it began to like shake out, obviously there were great guys in the other platoons as well. And we all got very balanced teams. But when we're picking our squad leaders, they're like 20, 21, 22-year-old guys. And this film, The Gift, is about Corporal Jason Dunham, who's awarded the Medal of Honor. And in my platoon, I had a Lance Corporal squad leader who was awarded the Silver Star for his actions on that deployment. Matter of fact, he and I and a PFC were all wounded together on April 17th, and the three of us were all medevaced. And so you love your guys, and loving them doesn't mean that you're soft and easy with them, because a lot of times a platoon sergeant, like you would have a pet peeve, right? Like, hey, we don't do this. And your guys are, being young and, full of, just testosterone and everything else. They'll be like, well, that's bull crap. First platoon doesn't have to do that. And I would say, we ain't first platoon or whatever the platoon is, we're third platoon. Yeah. This is how third platoon does it. So there's a certain amount of, installing discipline, but also developing unit pride and having high standards. And so, like, when a platoon sergeant makes these kind of rules, it's not like you're trying to be, like an authoritarian, but you're making it for a reason. Yeah. Here's a little example. We had these little shower trailers, and so I would not let my guys walk to the shower in flip-flops, or what the Marine Corps calls shower shoes. And they're like, why? Everybody else can do that. I said, because if we start taking mortar fire, you can't run in flip-flops, right? You can't run in shower shoes. But I told them, I said, I tell you what, I said, I'm not a tyrant. If you have like a pair of Tevas or some of those, like, you got sandals with a heel strap, if that's your shower shoe, you can wear those. Yeah. And so a couple of days later, I'm walking, I see one of my squad leaders, and he's got a pair of, flip-flops on, but he took a boot band, which is an elastic strap we used to cuff our trousers. He had that around. He hooked up a boot band to the bottom of his shower shoe. And I said, what are you doing? And he goes, no, they got a heel strap on them. I'm good. So I picked up a handful of rocks and I said, hell yeah, let's see you run. And I was like, incoming. I start chucking rocks at him. And when he was running, his flip-flops came off. And I said, that's why we don't wear those to the shower. Yeah. And so there's humor in there, but there's also discipline. And it's like, hey, look, guys, I'm making these rules because I want you to come back alive. Right. So when you go into a fight, there's a thing too that you care about your guys. But when the shooting starts, we run to the sound of the gunfire. We have to perform. There's no turning back. There's no like, hey, you go, I'm not going to go. Like, you all go there together, and you don't think about the cost. Or when you lose a guy, you fight through it, right? It's a shock to the system, but you fight through it. And only later does the emotional and mental toll of what happened actually begin to settle in on you,
Yeah. No, that's great. And coincidentally, I've got a hilarious story. So we were over at the government center, just outside the little camp we were at in Afghanistan, side of the mountain, middle of nowhere, and every day we had these like attacks that would happen. And I'm saying attacks, like they attacked every day. For people who from the regular world, they're like, oh my God. They're all like, whatever. They're just shooting at us. But we were in there, and I had a civil affairs guy with me. And he's just not very good at combat. He hasn't been. He doesn't have the experience. And so they would shoot this recoilless rifle, the worst named weapon ever, and they would shoot it at us into just for everybody watching. The recoilless rifle is just picture like a bazooka, and it launches like an RPG kind of thing, and it goes boom. That's not exactly right, but that's good enough for what we're doing here. And so, sure enough, boom! Here comes the recoilless rifle, and it's launching at the building that we're in. And our building is 150 yards from the gate of our camp, right? And so, we're not in the red zone. We're in the red zone, but it's pretty close. And so, I look at the officer who's there, and I see like the fear in his eyes. And so, and again, I have no authority, right? I'm just Pete. I'm like, hey, we're in a concrete building. Just get in the middle room. Nothing's going to happen. And he panics. So just everybody else, when an attack happens, the Army responds. And so the radios start chattering. Everybody's making sure they're going to their spot. People are responding and going to different stations, and we're looking if we're going to return fire or not. And so there's a lot going on. And I know that they know we're outside, the two of us. And so all we've got to do is kind of sit tight. And then when things calm down, they'll extract us out of there if we even need to. Probably just be nothing. Well, this guy panics and he runs towards the camp. I, by the way, am wearing flip-flops. And so he peels out, and I'm like, I'm obligated now. Like, I can't let now is my battle buddy. Yeah. I can't let him run alone across this gap. By the way, someone now has to leave a safe place and run towards the fence because he's calling in, talking over everybody, trying to someone's got to come to the gate. We're stuck out here. And I was so embarrassed, right? And so to get into our camp, they had this 7-turn concertina trap that you had to go through. And if you went fast, it would for sure grab your clothes. It was very hard to get through. Yeah, so as we're running away from the combat, I'm in my flip-flops. He's running. He's way ahead of me. Doesn't even give a fuck about me. And I'm just running like, oh, you got to be goddamn kidding me. Running out towards combat is another civilian dude. And he's going to go run to his guards that are contract guards that kind of help us protect us. And so he's like, tick. And I'm running, and I'm like, this is so embarrassing. This is the former Green Beret guy. He's going to see me running away from contact. This is so embarrassing, and I'm like, oh my, I was like, it was the worst thing ever, but I was trapped. And for sure, I'm like, why am I wearing flip-flops? I mean, it made sense to wear flip-flops because I was going to a place where I take my shoes off now. So I'm like, I'm just going to wear these things like these guys. But it sure as shit got stupid. I was having to run through that stupid 7-turn, all these things.
Oh my goodness, that's funny.
Terrible. Yeah, I'm gonna get back.
This makes me think of some random. Okay, yeah.
Go ahead.
Real quick, I got another funny thing.
Yeah.
It just occurred to me. One of my favorite memes. There's always some good inter-service rivalry or banter. So I saw this thing once, and it was Army and Marines. And so the Army guy says, "Oh, in the Marines, you run to the sound of gunfire. That's cute. In the Army, they teach us to shoot back."
But it is like these standards that we're talking about. They have to be maintained by these guys. Yeah. And what I wanted to get back into was Corporal Dunham. Was he a squad leader or was he a team leader?
He was a squad leader. Yeah. So, and back then our manning levels were such that each squad was about 10 Marines. And so you basically had 2 fire teams in each squad. Yeah.
And then he was a Lance Corporal at the time?
No, he was a corporal, but he had come from security forces. So in the Marine Corps, individuals who come on a security force contract, they go to the School of Infantry, but then they go to a Navy command for 2 years. And then they come to the FMF, the Fleet Marine Forces, for 2 years and basically do 2 years in the infantry battalion. And so some of the guys who go to, they go to, like, he was in Kings Bay, Georgia, for example. So they guard, they guard subs down there or whatever. And I think he went to like CQB school and things like that. So, and then he came to us. He initially came to 3rd Battalion, 4th Marines, which is a sister battalion. But I guess he didn't have the time with them, or maybe they needed to move some people around. So he went from that battalion, which he was only there for a short time, and he came to our battalion, 3-7, 3rd Battalion, 7th Marines. And in the documentary, and then in some of the interviews, you'll see that people were just really impressed with his maturity, his competency, and his level of leadership. So they wanted to make him a squad leader, which was unusual for 2 reasons. One, when a guy comes from security forces, sometimes you're not sure if his infantry skills are where they need to be. So there's a hesitation to place him in charge. But the other thing is he was actually a machine gunner, which means he was an 0331. And we had regular rifle squads, 0311s. And so even though he wasn't an 0311, his platoon sergeant, Stessner Ferguson, he said, you know what? No, I see something special in this guy. And so I'm going to make him a squad leader. Even where others were said, are you sure? He was like, no, I'm sure. And so again, it was his performance, his competency, and really his demeanor too, because another good thing they do in the film, they talk about like he was a good guy, right? So he wasn't like an authoritarian, but he knew how to turn on the heat if he had to, right? So he could crank down on his guys if he needed to, but also he was just like a good natured guy. He was one of the boys. I didn't know him well because I was a platoon sergeant over here, and I knew him like I knew all the guys in the company, but I didn't know him like the guys in his platoon, the guys in his squad, which will come out in your film. But one time I can remember just going up to the barracks. I'm a platoon sergeant and I have to check on the guys, right? And I just remember he's like him, and half a dozen other guys are standing around with their shirts off. They're like grilling steaks and drinking beer and playing music loud. And I'm just making sure, I'm just kind of walking through, doing what they call LBWA, leadership by walking around. Hey, what's going on around here? And they're like, these guys are just like, they're just specimens of manhood. Like, what's going on, Sergeant? How you doing? You want a beer? And I'm like, no, I'm good. And you guys don't have too many either. And it was just one of those environments where, it's a very Spartan thing, but it's a very kind of macho thing too. But it's also, honestly, man, it's a very beautiful thing to see the brotherhood and to see just how vibrant and strong and alive these guys are. And, something that comes out in the film too, is it talks about he had to extend his contract to make the deployment. So because of the timing of his end of active service, he didn't have to go to Iraq, but he was a squad leader. He trained his guys and he felt an obligation to his men. Now that's powerful. He felt an obligation to his men. He was like a 22-year-old corporal, right? Yeah. He's not like some 40-year-old guy who's been around forever. Right? He's a very young man, but he feels an obligation to his Marines. They are his brothers. And he's like, nope, you're going, I'm going. And it was like, almost as though it wasn't a decision, as though it was an inborn sense of duty and obligation that he did. And what's remarkable is that happened to a lot of guys. There were a lot of young men who did that. It just so happened that his story culminates in, that really courageous act of valor.
Yeah. We're talking about the standard, right? And I don't want to make things political, but I did a show about Tim Walls and what the standard is for a sergeant major. And you're describing it. If you were in a artillery unit, your motto is king of battle. You have to deploy. There's no sergeant major in the military that's like, no, don't deploy my guys. We're not. They're all like, no, deploy us first. We're the best. We have to go. It shouldn't be anybody else but us. This is what we have to do. This is what we're born and bred to do. This is what we train for, right? That's the attitude. And then you got a guy like Corporal Dunham, same things. Like I could have got out. I could have done something else. I could have been somewhere else. Yeah. But I couldn't in good conscience let these guys go. It has to be me that leads them. It has to be them. I couldn't live my life. I'm speaking for Jason, like I know him or something, but I know these guys. Yeah. I couldn't live my life if I didn't measure up, if I didn't do my job. And so like that's a difference right there, that standard of what it means to do that. And look, in this case, it ends in this tragedy, but it's a tragedy if you don't go. Right, you're avoiding this thing.
Yeah, it sure is. And some of I do a lot of writing. I write for a couple of different places, and then I kind of write I've got a long-term project. But one of the things I wrote a long time ago, as I said, for a certain kind of man, the one thing that is worse than war is for there to be a war and not be a part of it. Yeah. And so that really calls to an old sense of duty, and you do feel like you have to go. Corporal Dunham was hit on April the 14th of 2004. 3 days later, on April 17th, 2004, is when I was wounded. And I took an AK-47 round to my hamstring and shrapnel to my arm. This kind of shadow box in the background has the two magazines I had when I got blown up. So I got medevaced, and I did the whole medevac journey. I got hit in Huseba. I went back to the what they call the FRIS, which is I think field resuscitative surgical suite or something like that, in Al-Qaim. And then I went to an army, what they call a cash hospital in Balad. Then I went to Kuwait. Then I went to Germany. And then I went all the way back to 29 Palms, California. And while I was there, the unit is obviously still in Iraq. And I'm healing up from this, this AK-47 round went straight through my hamstring, had a dime-sized piece of shrapnel on my arm from a grenade. And I was just absolutely consumed with the idea of getting back to where the guys are.
Right.
And I was also trying to balance my responsibilities at home because my wife was like 9 months pregnant with our third child, and our other two kids were toddlers. But I was so overwhelmed with my obligation and my duties at 3-7 that I was like, I have to get back. And so I had to jump through hoops, but less than 90 days from being medevaced, I was flying back to Iraq to finish the deployment.
And you're proud of that, like that's like,
Yeah.
this is what I did. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there was a cost associated with that, like for years, like working through family issues. It's like, I could have been home for the birth of my child, but I left like 2 weeks before she was born. But I will tell you that I flew back on like July 5th. While I was flying back, I got a phone call informing me that my platoon the company had gotten hit, and 3 guys from my platoon had got killed. And so my first thought was that I should have been there. I should have been there, but I couldn't. And one of the things that helped me mentally and emotionally was knowing that I was on my way back. And so I made it back all the way back to Al Qaim in Iraq the day before we had a memorial service for those guys. And I thought that they were going to replace me because a combat replacement had taken over as platoon sergeant. So I thought they were going to shuffle me around. And I can't tell you how incredibly grateful I am that they took that combat replacement. They moved him and they said, hey, Walker, you're going back to your platoon. And so I was able to, on that same deployment, after being wounded in medevac, to come back to my platoon, to stand in front of them, to speak at that memorial service, and then to say, hey, boys, we still got like a couple of months to go. So get your head in the game. Let's get back together. I'm sorry I wasn't here, but I'm here now. And so, that sense of really belonging and that sense of purpose and that sense of duty, it was a bond I felt with those Marines. And if I had not had a chance to come back, it would have been something that I wrestled with for the rest of my life. Even though that came with a cost, missing my child's birth, appearingly like leaving my family to go be with these guys. And I'll be honest with you, man, I haven't told many people this, but when I flew back, my headspace at the time was that I thought I was going to get killed. I thought that I wasn't going to come back from the second time. I thought that, maybe God had let me get wounded, go home to see my family one more time to say goodbye. And that when I went back to Iraq, that I was never coming home again. That's really what I believed. And that's not like theologically sound or anything like that, but that's what I believed. And so I was quite surprised to live through that deployment. And I think one of my struggles since then was like, well, I wasn't sure about how to navigate life. And recently I just read another book on my shelf. It's called Hangar 4. And it's about it's about a 53 pilot from the Marine Corps. And I highlighted the line in his book, and he said something to the effect that I was surprised to come home. I thought I was going to die. And so I think that experience resonates with a lot of veterans. And so you're trying to navigate, hey, how do I deal with life when I thought I wasn't going to make it? You're so focused on this mission and this deployment right now that you can't see what's beyond it. And so when you come out of that, you're kind of stunned and disoriented.
There's a lot in that because your wife gets to say to you, but we actually are your family. Yeah. And then you don't have enough of you to go around. Yeah. And then on top of that, your nation gives you this moral injury of being like, hey, we were only kind of half-assed it. It's not believe we're just not going to do this job. And you're like, I went over there. These people died. I did all this shit. I poured my heart into this. I burned up years of my life. I used up my joints, and you're going to tell me you were half-assing it?
Yeah. One of the things I say, you get a little bit of a dark humor or gallows humor in uniform. So I did 3 tours in Iraq, but I never served in Afghanistan. And people, just because of my generation, they assumed that I served in Iraq and Afghanistan. So when they asked me, did you go to Afghanistan? My response is no, losing one war was enough for me. So I don't mean that dismissively, but it's it's kind of a dark humor response. But I know a lot of veterans of our generation are very frustrated from the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. But I will tell you my take on it, and not everyone's going to agree with me, but I don't allow myself to think about the political consequences of whether or not we should have been there, whether or not we should have gone. I can't handle that because I don't think that I'll be able to find a reason to justify it. So all that I concentrate on is that, why did I go? I went because my Marines went. I went because this Marine went and this Marine went, and I was there fighting for them. I wasn't there to try to make Iraq a better place. I was there because the Marines were there. Plain and simple. I was fighting for the Marine on my left and right. And so that may be short-sighted. That may have a certain professional immaturity to it. But what it has is it has sincerity. And it allows me to maintain my sanity by, setting boundaries up in my own perspective. Yeah.
But there is a problem with principled behavior. Like you are doing what you're supposed to do. That's exactly it. That's your focus. That where you're at. I'm out there desperate to try to help. If I'm working, I'm trying to help your battalion. Do what you're supposed to do. And I'm like, there's no. The thing I would do is I would leave the protection of the camp. I'd look down at the ground and be like, my feet are now here. This is where I am. I have new rules. And so that's the combat Pete, right? I'm a super happy-go-lucky guy, but. I worked past all of the pain, all of the anxiety, everything. And I just worked and I worked and I worked. But the folks who make the big decisions didn't have the license, didn't have the desire. And so it's like, you betrayed me, and I told other people in Iraq, like, no, this is what's going to happen. This is how we're doing it. And it was all a lie. And these wounds they're nasty, and so, it's good that you're able to deal with it. And find that. I don't blame anybody who doesn't like it. And I can say, hey, actually, Iraq's kind of a victory because they have a functioning parliament and they elect their own people. Now that actually is in our favor, but it sure doesn't taste very good. It sucks.
Yeah, and moral injury is real. I'm not minimizing that. I'm not invalidating folks that are struggling with that. Just for me, I've compartmentalized my own perspective so that I can. Yeah. Well,
your guys is different. You have a different job than I do. I'm out talking to government officials. I'm talking to all these people, and I'm seeing like the people that need help that we're not even bothering to help. Let's not get into my stuff, but a little while ago we were talking about Corporal Dunham's rank and his age. This kid's 22. How young does that seem now?
I know. Yeah.
And
those of us who were platoon sergeants, we felt like old men, and we were like 27.
Yeah. And so he gets this squad that's heavy. It's advanced. Okay, he's ready for it. Yeah. But that day, and look, he does exactly what he's supposed to do. What other Marines might have done. Someone else, if it wasn't him, someone else might have jumped on that grenade that day. You don't know, but it was him.
It was selfless and it was in a moment, and two of the men you'll see in this documentary are Bill Hempton and Kelly Miller. One was a fire team leader and one was, I believe, a rifleman at the time. So they were guys in his squad. So they were both there and wounded in that same blast. So they were medevaced along with Corporal Dunham. And today these guys are husbands and fathers, and they live lives full of relationship and love. And certainly they've had struggles like many of them have. But them living and loving their families is a great show of gratitude and appreciation for what Corporal Dunham did. And so any of us that got to come home, we should remember that. We should remember that the best way to honor the people we lost is to live and love well now. The title of the film is called The Gift, right? And one of the quotes that you'll see appear somewhere in the movie is something that I wrote and then I gave to Trent Gibson the night before he spoke at the National Museum of the Marine Corps. And so the kind of what they call Medal of Honor Week, there's like kind of three events. There's one in the White House where the President of the United States gave the medal to Corporal Dunham's family. Then there's one at I think it's at Congress called the Hall of Heroes. And then the third event was at the museum. And so I gave this quote because I've always been a writer, and only for the last 10 years have I actually begun to publish anything. So I wrote this quote, and I came up to Kilo 6 to Gibby, Trent Gibson. I said, "Hey, sir, I think this is fitting." And so the quote, which you'll see in the film, says, "All that we have has been given to us, and what we do with what has been given is how we honor those who gave." And then, the film is called The Gift, and I was very humbled, and I felt a tremendous sense of gratitude that that quote, that line resonated with all the guys, right? All of Kilo Company, they took those words to heart. It meant something to them. And then you'll see that theme throughout the film, the guys talking about the gift that they've been given, one man giving his life for another. It's it's a powerful thing. It's about brotherhood. It's about legacy. It's about generations. And, Marines are really big on history. We're big on legacy and the things that went before us. And there's people we can name, right? We can name Manila John Basilone. We can name Chesty Puller. We can name, Dan Daly. Marines in succeeding generations will name Corporal Jason Dunham, right?
Yeah.
There's a station down at the Crucible in Paris Island that's named after Corporal Dunham. There's a barracks in Kings Bay that's named after Corporal Dunham. There's a Navy ship named after Corporal Dunham. And so we've got a group of guys right now who knew that man. So although he is and will be a legend in the Marine Corps history, he was also, he's also a good kid from a family in upstate New York. He's a guy who was known by people who are still living today.
Yeah. I don't know if you know this or not, but Andrews and Wilson wrote the most recent Jack, what do we call it? Tom Clancy, Jack Ryan book.
Okay.
And the corporal, making me emotional. The Corporal Jason Dunham is the main character in the book. That ship is one of the main elements of that thing. And so not only is it all of these stations at the Crucible or, signs on a freeway and all that stuff, but they respected him so much. And I had Brian on the show talking about the book. They're like, did you guys know Jason? And he's like, no, but the story is so great that we wanted to make sure that we included him in this legendary fiction series. So it's that impact is huge. And here's the thing I know. In my hometown is the last survivor of the USS Indianapolis getting sunk during World War II. There's one dude left. That's it. And those guys that survived, they belong to each other the rest of their lives. And now it's just Harold, and that's it. And you guys have something special like that too with Jason, where that gift, that event, that sacrifice is going to be you guys coming together routinely throughout the rest of your lives until there is, just one of you left. Yeah. 60 years from now or whatever it is.
Yeah. And
what a wonderful thing that is.
It really is. And for the guys that are in uniform now, in addition to writing, I do some speaking. And so when I have a chance to speak to Marines, here's one thing that I tell them. I said, in the Marine Corps today, you will walk with legends and you will serve with heroes, but you won't know it until after the fact. Yeah. And that's so important because if we went back in time to like say 2003 or early 2004, and I don't mean this to take away in any way, but what I mean to say is this: there were a lot of guys, right, throughout our company, throughout the Marine Corps that were like Corporal Dunham, meaning they were strong, good young NCOs. Yeah. They worked hard, they loved the Marines, and they were ready to do what may happen. And it just so happened in Corporal Dunham's time, it came down to that one event in April of 2004. But there are people who have that potential in uniform today. And so if you're like a small unit leader, I would say, hey, don't treat your people condescending. Yeah. Love them, mentor them, train them as though they're your replacement. Because at some point, guess what? Corporal Dunham was a PFC, and he had a team leader and a squad leader that impacted him for better or for worse. A lot of what he did is because of who he was, but there's also an element of leaders that he was exposed to before, we lost him. And so it's an example of what we were a part of. He's a shining jewel in our history. Like he's a man that we will love and we will remember. And so I hope that telling his story inspires people, particularly Marines, to be better Marines, to lead their people well, to invest in them, not because they want to be associated with someone who's great, but because they're special people, right? Again, we talk about Marines having a certain culture, keyword cult, but Marines are special people. And so we really need to, as we lead our Marines, we need to love those Marines too. And that doesn't mean you coddle them by any way. You can be hard on them. You can be demanding on them, but you treat them as though
you have to be.
Yeah, you better be.
Yeah,
so,
because the training has to be hard. It has to at least match, if not exceed, what you go through, and understanding things like not wearing your fucking flip-flops and whatever it is, right? Yeah. All of those things, that's part of all that greatness you're describing. All those heroes and those legends, you're living up to that standard all the time. The guys who went before you, all this stuff that we've discussed before. It's huge. By the way, everybody, the link for the gift is right there. You can watch it on Apple. It's wonderful. One of my favorite things, and I'm going to shut up and let you finish. I'm going to wrap it up. But when we talk about all this stuff, pushing the boundaries of like what's possible, leading, doing the right things, all this stuff. There's this great thing that Trent says. He's the commander of the company, and he had an opportunity. He was so impressed with Corporal Dunham that I think it's the night before he dies, because he's working hard and he's trying to get everything set up for this patrol in the morning that ultimately he dies on. And he's like, man, I should take a picture, because this is what being a Marine is all about. It's like the epitome of great leadership. But we all have that thing that pulls us back, and it's like, nah, like that's this going to be good enough. I'm tired. We're all tired all the time. And he didn't take that picture. And that's the regret, right? Because he didn't meet the standard in that moment, and he lost that opportunity to do something that would have been important to him. And we all have these things where we know we could have taken that extra step to do that next thing. And it's how hard do we push against that boundary? And that sits with me in a way that, there's not enough time in combat. 36-hour days are norms. You just like, you put another dip in, you grab it, rip it and drink it and get back out on the next patrol. Like in my line of work, if there's a Marine patrol going out the door and I'm supporting you guys, okay, great. And if the next lieutenant comes on, it's like, hey, you're going to go on the patrol? Hell yeah, I'm going to go. I'll be tired later, right? Yeah. And so that opportunity to lead, do that next thing that is going to maybe make a difference. And in this case for Trent, it's a picture. But it is a poignant thing where you're like, here is the epitome of it. And then Trent lets himself down, and he's open about it. I love that accountability that he puts on himself, because that lesson impacts how Trent leads the rest of his life.
Yeah. And I appreciate him sharing that as well. I remember that story well. I was sitting in the COC that night. I remember I was reading a newspaper from back home. When my family would send me care packages, they would put newspaper in there.
Yeah.
But more than the items they sent me, I wanted to open that hometown. I grew up in Western North Carolina, so it was the Asheville Citizen Times. So I wanted to read the local newspaper just to kind of read what was going on. But I remember sitting there reading the newspaper, and when this happened, when Hampton and Carbajal came in to bring the chow to Corporal Dunham, and so looked at Captain Gibson, captain at the time, right, and we kind of looked over there and we both smiled, and we didn't really conversate about it, but we recognized what was happening. And it was such a beautiful thing. But him sharing that experience is important for two reasons. One, he recognized that something special happened at the time. And although he kicks himself for, not taking a photo to memorize that, by the telling of that story in this film, that story will be perpetuated for generations. And so it's really good. And it has been my experience, the Marines who have fought in Iraq and Afghanistan, the experience has been so raw and so real. I routinely hear things now that I did not hear as a young Marine. And what I mean is I hear Marines tell each other, I love you. I can't remember hearing that before the war. Maybe they did, maybe when they're drunk, especially like, oh, I love you, man. But I routinely heard that since we started fighting in Iraq in 2003. And I've seen it across Marine veterans and leaders. So not just buddies, not just peers, but leaders look at their Marines in formation and say, hey, I love you. And I think that's a powerful thing, because we recognize that not everybody comes home. And so if I were to lose a guy, what's the one thing I would want him to know before he was lost? I want him to know that he's loved, that his brothers love him. And I think that will make it a little bit easier is probably the not word. Make it easier is not the right phrase. It will bring a measure of comfort to the families that they know that the son they lost was loved, that he was loved by the people who are around him. That will provide a measure. It won't make it easier, but it will provide a measure of comfort. And so, I appreciate, Trent sharing that story, and really, and even what you're doing in this podcast, people sharing their stories is what connects. People connect through storytelling, and that's actually my method of writing. So, when I write for Eddie's Veterans Magazine, or this year I'm going to have a column in Leatherneck Magazine called Lessons. Oh, nice. It's called Lessons from the Smoke Pit. And so my approach is to teach through storytelling, not like fictional stories, but recounting. Well, what in the Navy and the Marine Corps we call sea stories, but not just war stories, but recounting experiences in storytelling fashion and teaching lessons that way. Because I'm wholly convinced that's what people remember. They don't remember lectures. They don't remember, a lot of things, but they do remember stories. So if you can touch their heart with a story, that will help prepare them for the next human event that they're going to have to face that's going to demand.
Well, listen, we've done this for about an hour. Everybody, you guys got to watch The Gift. It's so good. You're going to love David Kniess's film. All of these guys have done such a great job of bearing their souls. And it's not an easy project, not a general project. It's a hard project, but you got to watch it because you're going to get something out of it. And it's incredible. I'm so glad that we have this era now, Adam, where we can capture these things. There's a picture on a wall in a unit, headquarters in Germany where I was when I was assigned the 165th, and there was this guy named John Pruden. I think his first name is John, but he won a Medal of Honor. Just a black and white photo, just a placard, just a real quick story about his his citation, and that's it. But now we can have pictures, we can have footage, and we can tell these stories because there is so much to them, and it's part of the gift. We all get to enjoy this part of the gift and understand what life is and how precious it is. You tell it with your stories. Like, these things matter. Catch this person now, talk to them, go sit down, have coffee, slow down, sit by a lake with your friends, tell them you love them, because you don't want to tell them when they're dead. You want to tell them when they're alive.
That's right.
And that's part of what the gift message is. I'm going to shut up and let you finish up. And then thank you very much for coming on. Come back anytime you want. All right, I'm shutting up now. Your turn.
Hey, Pete, I really appreciate the opportunity to come on the show and share some of these stories tonight. I'm very proud to have served as a member of Kilo 37. I love those men. A lot of times when we sign off, we say Semper Fi, like all Marines do, but we also say Semper Kilo. And so I'm humbled to have been associated with such legends. I'm kind of a half stepper, just trying to keep up with all of those great men. And so I'm humbled to be a part of them. And so just to be able to share the story and shine the spotlight on them is truly humbling. And if anybody listens to that, absolutely go watch The Gift. Remember what those Marines did. Remember, be thankful for the life that you live. Try to be good. Try to be good people, right? Try to be have a good relationship with those in your family, to be a good neighbor, and just to try to put others above yourself, because that's a true lesson that we can all live. And so, and for the Marines, listen, this is your legacy. This is your history. This is your story. And the people that you serve with now will also make history. So each Marine has the opportunity to add to the Marine Corps' legacy, but you're forbidden from taking away from it. So be a good Marine.
Yeah, be a good Marine. Yeah. All right. For everybody else, I'll